the part I don't know. I mean, I've seen it on the tapes a couple times. It's on the webpage, and you've done it once while I was watching.
A couple of rules we need to abide by. That is to understand. Black powder residue is corrosive to metal. If you leave it in contact with metal over an extended period of time, it will corrode the metal. Water will neutralize black powder residue. Water will make the weapon rust. So oil is the one that mitigates the rust. I don't have $1,300 laying around, so I always take care of my weapon. So it behooves you to really care for your weapon because it's a lot of money. And I don't know where we are nowadays in getting new weapons. I don't know if they're ever going to start producing again. That's going to go away.
Yeah.
To make everybody clean their weapons and take care of their property, as well as company-owned property. Every time we go out and shoot the weapon, I'm going to make available a cleaning station where people coming back from the firing line can go clean their weapons, okay? If it's done on a Saturday, if we have a battle scenario on a Saturday, they need to clean the weapon for the Sunday scenario, if we have a 2-day event. Even if they have a 1-day event and they don't have the stuff at home, they can clean their weapon adequately so they can take it home. This little kit, I have 6 of them that I'm going to make available. In it, you have gun oil in a small container. Actually, there's 2 of them in there. Got plenty of patches in here that I cut from old t-shirts and cotton cloth. It has rags. I'll explain in a minute what to use the rags for. And these, by the way, come from a dollar store. It has a lubricant in here if you want to unseat the nipple if it's really frozen in place. You have some toothbrushes to get into the nicks and grooves and the little crevices. And this, the ever so important, when you remove the nipple, the little wire brushes. These little wire brushes are ideal for getting into the threads on the nipple after you remove it, and also around the bolster that collects all the carbon. Last but not least, I have a paintbrush in every one of these kits where you can spray or put a little bit of gun oil on the tip of it and then just go over your weapon in this fashion to put a light coat of oil all the way around where you normally don't. Okay, so that'll all be available to everyone that wants to use it. On the lid, underneath the lid, there are 4 little clasps that have cleaning rods. I made 4 cleaning rods. I used regular 1/4-inch steel I got from Lowe's. Put a brush on the end. First I put an adapter on it because I cut 1/4-inch 20 threads on the shaft. Made a little adapter, screwed that on there, and then I put a 12-gauge shotgun brush at the end. This one is 5/16/20 threads on the bore brush. So you put that in there. The reason I put this little square at the end underneath the knob is because when you get down to the bottom of the barrel, can I use your weapon to do that? It's unloaded, isn't it?
Yep.
You get down to the bottom of the barrel and you have a patch around it. You can use this to turn it, but always turn it clockwise. If you turn it counterclockwise, you're going to unscrew that bore brush and you're going to leave it down there when you pull it back out. Can you hold that? That's a new brush.
Oh.
Did you see that stuff coming out of there? You need to be here. So what you can do is the initial one to take out the carbon. Leave it like that. After that, simply take a patch, a dry patch, and wrap it around. That's also right. Wrap it around and fold it over the tip. So when you push this down the bore and you turn it, what you're doing is you're cleaning the bottom of the barrel, okay? The end of the barrel. That's very important because there's only so much space before you get to that flash hole. And if you let that build up, you're going to block the flash hole. And no flash will go in there to ignite the powder.
Is that a dry patch you're doing?
This is the dry patch. I'm going to go through the process. All right, you fired your weapon. First thing you want to do, you get a little dispenser like your tin cup. Fill it with hot water. Take a patch, fold it in 4 ways or more. Put it under the hammer and cover up the nipple. Like so. Put the butt end down. Then you take a rag or a towel. And I should have had all this stuff right here. It's been used quite often. And you wrap it around the muzzle. There's 2 reasons for that before you pour the water in it. The reason for that is you don't want to have any water get behind the stock, running down the barrel, getting behind the stock. And also that barrel's going to get awful hot when you pour hot water into it. So be careful not to put that hot water on your hands, okay? Once you put the hot water in there and put about enough in there to come down to about maybe here, 4 or 5 inches from the top, take the towel, put it over the top. This is what I do. And I slush it back and forth, okay? And then I just pour it out. Don't pour it out near the camp because that smells. It's like rotten eggs, okay? Do that a couple of times. The last one, 3 or 4 times. The last time you do that, open that up and pour water in there and watch it come out here. Tilt it in such a way that it doesn't run against the rifle. Pour hot water in there and watch it come out and wait until it's clear. All right? Once it's clear, then you're good. At that point, remove the nipple. Put it somewhere where you won't lose it. And then you take your cleaning rod.
Sergeant, now if we don't have the cleaning rod available, we can just use our ramrod, right?
You can use your ramrod, but they're hard because if you use the end of the ramrod and put this over the top and fold it back and shove it down there,
well,
some of the ramrods,
I have the
they disappear into the muzzle.
I have the fitting on the end.
Last time I gave this kind of lecture, I made some steel plates with a 1032 thread in it that you can screw at the end.
Yeah.
And then that way you have something to hold on to. But sometimes if you push it all the way down, I've had quite a few of them come to me and say, I can't get my ramrod out. It's stuck on the bottom because it disappeared in the muzzle. Okay? It should be sticking out about 1/4 of an inch. Okay? You can put that little device on there, which is what I do, and you can pull it back out. Okay? When you get down to the bottom with the patch, always turn it clockwise, and what that will do, like I said before, it'll clean the bottom of the barrel, okay? Clean most of it out, just like that. All the way down. turn it clockwise, pull it back out.
No puff of smoke on that.
Wow, I thought I cleaned this.
Oh, look at that.
You can do this 1,000 times, use 1,000 patches, it'll
get
still
crap
come out
come out.
good. And the reason for that is because all the particles in your black powder are coated with graphite to make it less susceptible to static electricity and set it off, okay? And that black graphite will get into your metal pores and stay in there, and every time you put the patch down there, it'll come back out dirty, warm, semi-dirty, okay? You're not gonna get it perfectly clean, but you have to get it to the point where you're satisfied with that, okay? If it looks like this, it's just discoloration on it, it's fine, okay? So the last thing you wanna do is you put a little bit of gun oil on it, on a clean patch, wrap it around it, send it down there, turn it, pull it back out. Now what you can do is, if you have rings in your barrel, that means if you do live firing, you use actually mini balls. Sometimes you build up rings, carbon rings around it in the back of the projectile where it expands out, engages the lands and grooves, and comes out the barrel. There's a momentary halt, a pause on there when it actually all takes place, and you form a ring. This ring sometimes can be reduced by going down there and doing this back and forth, okay, to remove that with the bore brush. The other thing is, if you do any competitive shooting or live firing with this, what I have on my rod is I have a brass plug that fits inside the 58 caliber that has a hole in it, quarter-inch hole in the middle, that prevents the rod from working the inside of your muzzle, because if you do live firing, that's going to affect the accuracy of your projectile. Okay. But that's for competitive shooting. Any questions on how to do that? Then, when you get done with that, use a pipe cleaner. You can get them in a tobacco store or cigarette store. Go into the bolster where the threads are and the flash hole that goes to the base of your barrel. You have to go in there with a Q-tip or a pipe cleaner and get that cleaned out. Every so often what I do is I use an M8 tap that I have ground flat in the front so I can bottom it out. And I put it in there by hand. You have to be very careful. You don't want to open that up. But what it will do is will actually chase the threads and clean out all the carbon that builds up in it over time. But you do that very, very rarely.
Can we leave that for the Ordnance Sergeant?
I
would.
I do that, yeah. You would have to get yourself, all the tools. I have the tools, okay? So if you have that problem where you cannot put your nipple in by hand and it hangs up and you have to use a wrench and it gets very tight, come and see me and I'll chase those threads, okay? You have to be very careful not to open them to get them too loose. Once you clean that out, then you can go ahead and clean your nipple. If you go home and you want to remove the stock from your rifle, you should only do that maybe 3, 4, maybe 5 times the most a year. Try to minimize the removal of the stock, because this is the reason why. These screws on here, some of the malfunctions of the weapons when we're out in the firing line, people raise their hand, my rifle doesn't shoot anymore because I can't pull the trigger. It's because there are screws inside the lock system. Number one, every time you remove these screws that hold your lock system in place and you put them back in, the reason they have these brass inserts is so as not to wear into the stock. Because if you keep tightening it or over tighten it, if you look in the back where the hammer is, Look at where the hammer is. The other way. On this side. You see the ends of the screws? You see them? Right there? You see the end of the screws, right? Okay, you can't see them all though. You know why? There's one behind the hammer. And that comes from the other side. If you jam that screw in too tight, or over time, you compress the stock. The end of that screw will seat itself against your hammer and start making your hammer very tight and very hard to pull to the rear to go into the hammer full cock position. Okay? That's what I will look for when I inspect the weapons, is to make sure I look against the light like this. I see daylight between the hammer and the side of the face, the lock. And if I see something sticking up in there, that means there's something riding against the hammer. Or when you remove the lock and you look inside the hammer, you'll see a mark where that screw was impacting the hammer, and you have a devil of a time trying to pull back on it. Okay? So don't remove the stock unless you absolutely have to. When you do remove it, put some grease behind the barrel that is inside the stock. Okay? It's not going to hurt it. It's going to prevent rust. The other thing is on Enfields. People that have Enfields. These screws right here on the bands, on all three bands, they're captive screws, meaning that when you untighten them, when you loosen them, they get tight again. You loosen them, you turn them, and all of a sudden they get tight again. That's to keep them from falling off. Okay, out in the field, you're never going to find them in the grass. But you'll open it up far enough so that it becomes loose enough for you to slide it off the stock. Don't force it and turn it all the way until the screw cap comes off. You're going to lose it. Okay, it's a captive screw. That's only on the Enfield. Springfields have that spring-loaded catch. Don't forget when you clean your weapon to pull the ramrod. And when you have the stock removed, don't forget to get that little spring catch that's on the inside of the stock. There's a little pinhole right here. It has a little pin in it that keeps that little spoon in there. That is kind of like a spring that catches the ramrod and holds it in place. So when you push your ramrod in, it should go fairly easy until you hit that spoon. And when you hit it, you push the spoon out of the way and it captures the ramrod to keep it from falling out. Don't put a little bit of grease on there to keep it from rusting.
So if you have a hard time pulling your ramrod out, would that be because we didn't put the screw back
Most likely it'll be your bands are too tight.
Oh, that's all right.
Somebody over-tightened the bands.
Well, this is a Springfield, so it doesn't happen.
Then you should be okay. If that's too tight in there, chances are there's something interfering going down. That little spoon. Have you seen that spoon in there when you have it apart?
Yeah, I think it sticks up too much, and sometimes it doesn't even go down. I mean, it used to stay up where we had to take two of us to pull out the ramrod, but now it just sits down. It doesn't spring up. It's like we lost the spring maybe. So that's why I have to check.
I have very small. I have very thin. They almost look like nail clippers. They're very small. They fit. They're smaller than the hole you see in the side of your stock.
Okay.
For the Enfields, okay? You should have one too, on the other side. And I can drive that pin out once the barrel is removed and the spoon comes out. Okay, and then we can check to see if there's anything underneath there.
Okay.
Okay?
Yep.
And make sure that it actually, it should pivot around that little pin.
Okay.
All right? Let's see what else. The last thing that you want to do is, after you put a light coat of oil and you clean your ramrod and everything, the last thing that you want to do is you take a paintbrush that is in the kit, and spray a little bit of oil on it, on the tip of it, and brush the whole weapon down. I use a pair of old white gloves. That have become soaked with oil and grease. So when I wear these, I can touch the weapon and put it away because you know your hands sweat and the sweat has acid in it. Well, this is, that's why I have new ones, okay? But that's what they look like after you use them for a while. And when you have these saturated with oil and grease, everywhere you touch the weapon before, when you put it away, if you touch the band or something like that, you're not going to put acid on there from the sweat of your hands. So it behooves you to use these gloves, this type of glove. Any questions on anything? Another one.
Yeah, in the kit you mentioned the lubricant, and then just now with the barrel you mentioned grease. Is like petroleum jelly grease, or is there a certain kind of grease I want to put between the barrel and stock?
I would not use petroleum jelly. Petroleum jelly has acid in it, like axle grease. I use rail grease. That comes from my garage door.
Okay.
The dough that you put on the rollers. It comes in a little tube.
And we'll just
You can pick that up in the gun shop.
Yeah. A gun shop? All right.
Yeah, just make a slight light coat on
I
there.
believe you mentioned one time the lubricant, you mentioned don't use WD-40, so is there a special...
WD-40 gums things up.
Yeah, you said that, I
Yeah.
think, one time. So.
I would not use the WD-40, Bill.
No, that most guys it's
Yeah, or
WD is water displacement. It's not really a lubricant.
Yeah,
Okay, so
most gun
for a
people would say
lubricant,
no.
I want to get something from a gun shop also. They have a certain color?
Yeah, but when you use the kit that
Yeah.
we provide, it has spray lubricant and also anti-seize. This actually, if you spray that on your, if you can't get your nipple off,
Yeah.
you can spray that on there and let it soak for a while. It's
Okay.
like penetrating oil.
All right.
But it's not petroleum based. Don't forget your bayonet. In the wintertime, when you store the bayonet, don't leave it inside the scabbard because the leather sometimes oozes out moisture and it rusts in there, okay? Leave it out.
Like a good practice is don't leave it in the scabbard at all when you come home.
What most people have a problem with on the bayonet is making, see, I put, that's real, the real that little ring, the lock ring that's on here that has the screw in it, what I do on the ones that are owned by the company, I gauge for the weapons that are stored in there. I put it on the weapon. And I tighten up the screw until I cannot turn it. And then I back it up sufficiently so I can freely turn it and unlock it. Then I gauge how much distance is between the two legs on this captive ring. And I put washers in between them. I have these tiny little lock washers that I put in between it, and then I tighten up the screw against those lock washers so I close in the space and lock it in. So it does not adjust itself over time or you lose the screws. A lot of people lose that screw. So now it's tight in there, but it will always work because it does not adjust, okay? I can do that for you. I have extra screws in my toolkit. Everybody see that? How I do that? Put little washers in between it. Also make sure when you lubricate this and clean this, get inside here, okay? Any questions on the bayonet? Now, You can go to the store, gun store, and pay 11, 12 bucks for a small container of bore cleaner for black powder guns. Okay, very expensive. They don't last very often. Or you can pay 1/10 of the cost of these and make your own. You take 1 part of kerosene. Okay, there are multiple formulas for this. 1 part of kerosene, whatever measurement you use to make this. 1 part of mineral spirit. And 1 part automatic transmission fluid. Dextron 3 or Sunoco, whatever you have, okay? They call that big red when it's done. This will turn it red. And what you wind up with is this. Okay? Each one of those kits is going to have a container like this. I have one that is marked gun cleaning solvent for my house. I have that up on the shelf. Okay? Easily identifiable. Use an old antifreeze container, wash it out real good with cleaning solvent. And I use that to make this, to refill and replenish all the kits that we make available for you to use, okay? To use this, don't unscrew it and pour it over the end of your cleaning rod, okay? Use a patch, unscrew it, put it over the top, and do this. And then put it on your cleaning rod and send it down there, okay? But don't pour it down the bowl. It will work, right, Scott?
Yes, sir.
He had a couple of rings in his bore. He had a devil of a time trying to get the scraper through there. It was somewhere in the middle of the bore. Put a little bit of that on here, put it down there, took it right out. So very cheap to do this. It'll be available to you for use, okay? Bill was kind enough to make me a template or a gauge plate that looks like this. And what this is for, when you go to a sutler and buy a new nipple for your musket, okay? The sutlers has them all mixed up because the threads on those nipples vary depending upon the manufacturer. Some of them are 8mm by 1, meaning the distance between the top of the threads. You remember when I put this out a couple of meetings ago? Some of the manufacturers provide you with nipples that are 8mm in diameter, but the distance between the top of the threads vary from one nipple to the other. One is 8mm fine, meaning by 1, or it's coarse, meaning 1 1/4. If you have a weapon that has M8 by 1, and you buy a nipple that has M8 by 1 1/4, and you try to put that in there into your weapon, you're going to jam it, and you're going to mess up the thread in the bolster. So be careful when you go to the sutlers. Come and see me, and I'll provide you with this, subject to be returned to me. And you can take this gauge and go to his little cubby hole there at the sutler, find what you want, and try to see if it fits in the weapon that you have. If you don't want to take your rifle with you and do it on the rifle itself, okay? You can use this to find out. This one has 8mm 1 It has 516 SAE. SAE stands for Standard of American Engineering. 516, 18 threads per inch, 20 threads per inch, and 24 threads per inch. Just in case you find a nipple that the sutler is trying to sell you that has that type. They don't fit your weapon. Okay? Make sure you find the one that fits your weapon. So you need to know what you have on your weapon. If you don't know, I have the gauges, the taps and dies. I can check it for you and let you know what you have. So when you go to the sutler and buy a new nipple, you get the right one. Always should have a spare nipple with you anyway. Also, when you take the nipple out of your weapon, don't try to modify it. There's a restrictive hole inside the nipple that is there for a reason. It's very hard to clean because you need a very small rod or wire to get through there. Don't ever open that up with a drill. The reason for that is because you're going to build up back pressure from when that ignition takes place. It comes back up against the nipple and into this passage right here, and it could lift your percussion cap right off your nipple and push the hammer to the rear if the spring is not too tight. Okay, and it could hurt, injure you. All right, so never modify this. This has some instructions on it, reasons why. All right?
Would you care to guess like how often the nipple? I mean, they will erode. At some point, you just want to replace it and throw the old one away because that, if that throat starts to erode, it's going to cause the same problem you're describing.
If that is the case, like Bill said, if it erodes over time, some of the things that will probably happen to it, the top will probably mushroom out. If you do too much dry firing, in other words, you pull the hammer to the rear, let the hammer fall on top of the nipple without having a percussion cap. Percussion cap are made out of brass or they're made out of copper, and they're softer than the cap itself, than the nipple itself. But if you keep letting the hammer fall on top of your percussion cap without anything in between it, you're going to mushroom this, okay? Or eventually, you may have this port open up. If that is the case, if you're in doubt, come see me and I can give you an idea of whether or not by putting a wire through there. I have certain different size wires. If this is way open, I would recommend you get a new nipple.
Like you said, you should have them. They're cheap. You should have a couple in your kit anyway. Keep them in your cartridge pouch or something.
I prefer the stainless steel ones, even though you're gonna, when you put it in there, you're gonna have dissimilar metal contact, and that oxidizes over time. But it's not gonna be in there long enough for it to oxidize. Besides, I have a light coat of oil on it anyway, so it's gonna put some kind of a barrier in between the steel and the stainless steel. But oxidation most likely takes place if you have non-ferrous metals in contact with ferrous metals. Any other questions? There's one other combination of cleaning solvent that you can make. And you can go online and get even more than that. There's one that I know Bill prefers, and that is using the hydrogen peroxide, very cheap. And then you use rubbing alcohol. And then there is what's called a Murphy's oil soap, okay, that you can buy. I've been looking for it, but I haven't been able to find it. But mix that together, 1 part each, at any quantities that you want, and you have a good cleaning solvent. The alcohol will cause the barrel to dry out, okay, the preparation to receive an oiling. The hydrogen peroxide will dissolve the residue of the black powder. And And of course, the Murphy's oil soap will provide protection against rust. So those are the three ingredients that you can mix together to make another cocktail of cleaning solvent. If you don't want to use what I just presented. Any questions on that?
Is that the one that you got with the petroleum base? Is that what the NSSA guys use? I know you do that, yeah.
Yes.
Because I prefer the Murphy's oil soap. I think it's less aggressive with all the petroleum products.
Well,
and
I use in my
sloppy.
weapons a lot.
Yeah.
So,
Well, that's the difference. I use the one he just mentioned, the 1 part each of alcohol, Murphy's, and hydrogen peroxide. And again, it's cheap. I keep it in a Gatorade bottle, and I do, if I'm home, I take the barrel out, pour some into the thing with the bottom plugged, and then slosh it. And it mixes nicely. And then ultimately you rinse it out with hot, fresh water and swab it and go through all what Bill says, and then a light coat of oil. So either way, there are literally a dozen different ways of doing it. It all comes out the same.
Any other questions? On the lock system, that's the last item I have. On the lock system, don't take the main spring off unless you have the tool to compress it and unseat it. I have a tool that actually puts pressure on the spring and takes it up a little bit sufficiently where you can unseat it, because it's actually kind of seated in place. There's a little swivel on the bottom that you have to orient to catch the little fingers. And the other thing is, we had an occasion at Cedar Creek where Ron Otone, his weapon malfunctioned. He couldn't pull the trigger. And when in his case, what happened was, that's why you need to keep an eye on these little screws right here to make sure that they are flush with the plate. The top one, I believe it is, the top one is a little screw that holds the sear spring in place. And if that backs out over time, that little screw on the top, if that backs out over time, it actually allows your sear spring to come loose and jam the whole works inside your lock, and you can't pull the hammer, you can't pull the trigger. You have to take it apart. And it's a devil of a job trying to get that screw bit lined up, because you have to compress the sear spring while trying to find the hole to put that screw back in there. So always look for making sure that the end of the screws are flush with the plate. If you find that they're starting to go into the plate, let me know, because we need to go into the lock and tighten those screws again. Any questions? Think we're ready for the meeting?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, let's all give a round of applause for our Ordnance Sergeant for this excellent lesson.
All right.
Thank you, Bill.
All right.